All right. Welcome, everybody, to Exploring Reality. I got my friend Rob from Sentinel Apologetics here to review some stuff with my debate. This
As per
isn't going to
usual.
be this isn't going to be a full out review of like the whole entire debate. I did one of those with Big John Steele, and I'll be actually doing another one with Cameron on his channel as well at some point in the future. I think it's next week. For now, Rob and I were just planning on going over the cross-examination / discussion period, and kind of go from there. We wanted to focus on those points.
Yeah. And
So
also, just before we start,
yeah,
I'll just say this on the outset that I'm very encouraged and also I feel thankful that you were able to model. Like everyone loved the debate because not only were you able to model a very respectful decorum to Matt, but Matt reciprocated that back to you, and that's very good.
yeah,
So that's point number one. Point
yeah.
number
Did you have?
two.
Yeah,
Hmm?
keep going. Sorry.
Oh, well, just 2 points. So that first and foremost, because First Peter 3, the famous First Peter 3, have a defense, do it disrespectfully, and so on, right? Well, what's interesting about that, and this is now my second point, what's interesting about that is that Christians also misuse that verse, thinking that at any given opportunity, you should just always have an apologia, but obviously, do this respectfully and so on. So you did the respectful part beautifully. But I did at the same time I pushed back. So despite Matt's respect, my encouragement back to Matt in light of your uh your approach is that verses like that is all about why we continue to be Christian,
Yeah,
not we're Christian because here's the apologetics. Because the context of First Peter 3 is suffering and persecution. And so there's mockery to Christians in that passage about, well, you're suffering, and this makes no sense why you should continue to be a Christian. And then that's why Peter says, give a defense about why, and then with a clear conscience, they will. So you have the clear conscience in that context, and they'll be ashamed in, basically mocking you. And so
yeah,
that's the context of the passage. So this is sort of my I've seen enough of Matt's discussions on the atheist experience. I don't think him and I've had the opportunity to converse. I've seen him dialogue with a lot of religious folk and Christians who go for the ticking the box sort of approach. Like, okay, I've got that down apologetically and that down. One of the things I'm frustrated about is has Matt and again, I uh, I've sort of like left that side of the YouTube atheist scene for a while now, so I don't know how much of this Matt has done. So
hmm
this is I'm just word vomiting out
yeah,
stuff that hopefully Matt can, if he does make a response, maybe he can give a perspective. But has Matt engaged the Bible theologically? This is part of the response that I want to make. This is part of the reflections I have, like especially when he brings up Paul and the Damascus Road experience. Anyway, so that's just like the
yeah.
preface as to where we're going with this.
No, no, I like that, and I think you and I have very similar views when it comes to that because I'm pretty outspoken about how fed up I am with a lot of the apologetics scene, and I
Yeah.
think good theology is like what has to underpin a good apologetic. You have to understand the Bible, and you have to understand a lot of these weird things that are in the Bible. So
Mm.
I completely agree with all of that.
Yep.
I appreciate your thoughts too. I was really excited, as you could probably tell by the debate. I was really excited on the stage for like to be on the stage with Matt and to be having that
Yeah.
friendly of a
Yeah. Yeah.
conversation
Yeah.
with him.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that was really fun. So
Mm.
I'm just gonna get us over to here, and then people in the comments too. If you guys have questions, go ahead. Somebody asked thoughts on if you can't simplify your position from a scholarly level to a layman's level, you don't truly understand the position. Do you have any thoughts on that, Rob?
I would agree in some sense, but at the same time disagree. There are things that require
Yeah.
a lot of pages to explain. I suppose if you want to get to the root of the question, uh, if let's just put it this way, with enough experience and enough repetitive reevaluation of whatever model you're discussing or trying to explain, if that becomes like, in other words, that's your specialty, right?
Yeah.
Say you do this after a while. The irony of the question is that if you are indeed able to explain it sufficiently to a layman, that actually has everything to do about your ability and the truthfulness of your expertise in that topic. It has nothing to do with whether the topics are true or false. It's all to do with, like, for example, I could if I decided to go insane and spend the next 10 years of my life understanding flat earth theory. Now, I could go into the most arcane detail on flat earthism, and then say 10 years later, some layman who doesn't know about the theory, and then I explain it sufficiently. That shows how much time I've invested into that, and that I'm able to break it down. That's that in a nutshell is the case. In regards to the Bible, yeah, there are a lot of things that a lot of biblical scholars who specialize in that can do the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He followed it up by saying, so I actually thought he was going to ask this because I was anticipating maybe my case for the resurrection was not simplified very well, which, by the way, I fully admit my type of case that I do has a lot of moving parts to it. So I'm still trying to master the art of popularizing it. But
I mean, think about it. Like Paul, and this is where we're going to go with this, by the way. Paul being the litmus test here. Paul is persecuting the church. Again, I'm just I'm sort of spoiling it, but Paul is persecuting the church because it is asinine. You guys have Yahweh, the God of Israel, who's done all this magnificent stuff in the Old Testament, become human and die on a Roman cross. And you're saying that is salvation? You see? So
yeah,
now say if that is true, how do you defend that? Like how do you unravel a model of salvation history? Oh boy. Now that's hence all the creeds and all the commentaries and now the and the very granular like at the surface level beautiful, like, you know, John 3:16, everyone knows that verse. But think about again John 3:16 if you read it a little bit slower. For God so loved the cosmos, the world, he gave his monogamous, like his unique son.
Yeah.
Like once you start breaking it down, it's like, oh my goodness, unique son, cosmos, love. So there's levels of depth that you can go through. So
yeah. Well, I'll start this, and then just tell me to pause wherever you want me to pause. And
my mic's coming clear?
Yeah, you sound great. And then
all right,
if you didn't, I would assume that people would just say something. So
yeah, I got a new mic. I learned my lesson from
the IP stream.
I mean, it was fine when we got into the room, and then when it started live streaming, it's like, what the hell just happened?
All right. All right. I'm just going to ignore comments.
Beginning, please do not interrupt. Please do not throw verbal tomatoes or physical.
Streaming?
Can you hear it?
Is it coming on the...
You can't hear that? Okay, give me one second.
No, I can hear it, but is it meant to be a video on your... Oh, there we go. Yep.
Oh, you're good?
Yep.
Okay.
I was just wondering, was there meant to be a video on the screen though? Because I just saw...
Yeah, it's showing the video. Are you watching the stream at the same time?
No. It just, for some reason, it was blank. And now it's
okay, but we're good now?
Yeah, we're good now.
Okay, cool.
Tomatoes. Thank you so much. With that being said, I'm going to set the timer to 10 minutes, please. All right, Matt, you may begin.
So this is going to be fun because I just have a list of questions which I wrote down ahead of time. And even though I wasn't making any claims about God. Here's the first question. Why does God need us to assess probability of the resurrection instead of just confirming it?
Yeah, so it seems like this is an appeal to a divine hiddenness. Correct me if I'm answering and
A little
I'm
bit, yes.
Okay, cool. So there could be a lot of different reasons, right? For instance, God might have good reasons for keeping an epistemic distance away from us, but making things such that we do have to assess probabilities, but the likelihood ratio supports his existence, but not so much that it forces belief. So for instance, I would consider what we're doing here a really valuable thing, right? We're sitting here, and philosophers like to talk about the true, the good, and the beautiful, right? The alethic domains, the moral domains, and the aesthetic domains. Alethic is like truth value, truth finding domains. Now, I don't know if you're a moral realist or realist about values or anything.
I don't either.
Yeah. And so, for at least for me, my what I'm saying is, coming from that perspective with that stuff in my background knowledge, it seems like the conjunction of God's existence in some sort of value theory would predict something like God wanting a world where we're sitting here and having these really valuable conversations. That'd be a brief overview of
Sure.
what I think.
So was it unfair? Because I view this thing as particularly unfair, and I've said so before. Why doesn't everybody deserve a Damascus Road experience? Why is Saul picked out to specifically get an interaction that the rest of us don't?
Is that it sounded like there's more comment to that. Sorry.
No.
Yeah, I mean,
it's the same sort of thing, because it sounded to me, and pardon me for digging in more, but it sounded to me that you're basically saying we don't really know why God does this, but he's got his reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, according to scripture, he violates those for some people and not others. And that to me seems ridiculously unfair.
Yeah. So,
all right, pause it there.
Yeah, that's what you wanted to hit on for sure.
Yeah,
I thought.
Yeah. Now,
I really wanted to get into so many theological things here, but I was like, I don't know if this was the right setting for it. But
the thing is, I sympathize with Matt. I sympathize with you're trying to remind Matt that you're there for a discussion. You're there to tell Matt straight to, like, eye to eye, Matt, I have genuine feelings in this whole scenario, and then you transfer those what you would call subjective feelings to a more rational, say, a philosophical. That's where you're bridging the philosophical sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
What Matt, in an ironic, maybe ironic's too strong a word, but what Matt's basically trying to say is that, like, as you guys know, I love analogies. Matt is like a weird paradox of Neo and Morpheus in one. Matt is, so one side of it's like his left brain is Morpheus and his right brain is Neo. So his left brain is saying, there's a splinter in your mind driving you mad. And then the right side is saying, well, what is the Matrix? Like, so one side is curious and the other side is frustrated. You see? And hence, guess what? Welcome to the whole shebang of philosophy and brain in a vat, Descartes' demon, all that Matrix stuff. And then we have the mythologies of this world that encompass the gods and the theology. And is there a theology? So this is now what I want to encourage Matt. Okay, so you have all the philosophical baggage that we're trying to decipher this. Now, Paul, with the Damascus Road experience, I don't see why I need to have a clone version of the Damascus Road experience. Because I think that if there is, and coming back to your beauty, this language of beauty in life, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't consider Paul's Damascus Road experience any more beautiful than any other person's experience with some sort of divine, some sort of spirituality. You see, this goes into, like, philosophers like, say, Leibniz. The best of all possible worlds is this reality.
Yeah.
Why? Because he had a sense of foresight, not only being a mathematician and a philosopher, but also a theologian. he had a sense of foresight that this universe, every time we look to nature, notice he's still working contemporary with Newtonian thinking. So he had no concept of, say, quantum and all the the vastness of the universe, but he had a sense of the more we investigate nature, the more just grander it'll be, bigger it'll be, more special, and therefore there's like an equality with respect to the ontologies of whatever form and function of, like if this comes down to the famous parable of which ironically was included in the Quran, Solomon and the ant. I'm just throwing this as a random example where cultures are thinking about the ant is its own thing. Can we have a communication with it? Solomon, obviously, in the context of biblical anthropology, is that he's the imago Dei, which contradicts, by the way, all the other ancient Near Eastern creation myths that humans are subjected as slave workers, right? But we are like God images, whoever this God is. And we are told to be fruitful, multiply, cultivate, subdue the earth. But then when we go into the vastness of the cosmos, as David says, what is man? You should take notice of us because we're still tiny in comparison. But yet you've crowned us with glory and honor. Fast forward now to Jesus. Jesus is that sort of that when Neo is sort of splintered his mind, driving him mad. What's the Matrix? Morpheus comes into the Matrix, or the Trinity, right? Or Trinity. She types a few messages on his computer screen. There's this constant, I want to meet you. I want to bridge you here. Take, it's up to you, but take the red pill. We see this specifically with the God of Israel in Jesus. So the Damascus Road experience is Paul. It's important that it happened to Paul because according to that story, Paul is confused and angry that his worldview is such that Yahweh can only do it this one way. His fellow brother, Jews are saying, no, he actually did something quite remarkable. What you expect to be an end time thing, resurrection at the end of time, happened in time. Well, in the context of Pentecost, it would be 7 weeks prior to Pentecost. And now notice all the happenings of Pentecost, where Peter quotes Joel about the darkening of the sun and the moon turning to red blood. And guess what? If the crucifixion happened on the 3rd of April, 33 AD, yeah, there was indeed a moon. So the moon did rise up in the evening. That it was about a 60% lunar eclipse. So it had like a red hue over it. So that was in itself a weird one, especially for Passover. There's been recent geophysicists have been recently discovering and dialoguing about a potential earthquake in the region, and especially what's called a Kamzim dust storm layer in that earthquake layer in the Dead Sea area in 33 AD. And so Peter's thinking about this event just not even 2 months prior. And then you have this explosion of the church. But it's an explosion in the context of a story that starts all the way back in Genesis 10, 11, and 12. The Table of Nations that God disinherits. That's Deuteronomy 32:8 to the other gods. And then you have this long epochs of history where Israel is this miniature model or vehicle for the Messiah to come through. And then Pentecost happens, and it's a reclaiming back of the nations. So then fast forward to Paul. Jesus has something for Paul that I don't think any one of us even are in a position to do because we're just not in the right time and place to do it. Paul, you're persecuting me, and not just that, I have something for you now to do. Go to Spain. That's what Paul keeps saying in Romans. Like, go to the ends of the earth, but your direction is in that direction for the Gentiles' sake. Now, Paul says something interesting in Ephesians 3 that would be my theological response to Matthew. In Ephesians 3, he clarifies and says, this mysterion, this mystery that God kept secret, because even if the other divine beings knew about it, they wouldn't have crucified Jesus. That's First Corinthians 2.
Yeah.
Which in itself is a very telling statement. In Ephesians 3, he says, no human knew about this secret until I, and this is that secret that the Gentiles are heirs in common with the Jews and all that. And so therefore, Paul admits his position. I'm the least of the apostles. I'm someone that's as if I've been aborted or stillborn, or like he has a very peculiar wording in chapter 15 of Corinthians. He doesn't consider himself to be worthy, but he has, as and anyone here who's read, say, Mike Hives' work on divine counsel stuff, he has this shock. Oh my goodness, I'm now in the league of all the other biblical prophets that sort of ventured into the council in that theological sense, just like all the Old Testament prophets and so on. Paul now himself has had the privilege, although he himself retracts from that privilege, to realize his position. And then Philippians 3 is again the gospel where he says, hey, if you're going to talk about performance in the law, or like when he speaks about boasting in the flesh, he goes through his credentials. He's like, look, I can boast till the cows come home about I'm the Hebrew of Hebrews, born on the 8th day, circumcised, he was a Pharisee, 100% righteous in regards to the law. And then he says, by the way, all of that is dung compared to the righteousness that's imputed to me through Jesus' finished work, and that's a righteousness that comes from God, and that only depends on my faith in the finished work of Christ. And then he concludes chapter 3 by saying, therefore, what's the implication here? Our citizenship now is in heaven in Christ, with Christ, conform to his image with the Father, all that stuff. So notice that the theology of the text, Paul has his experience, and then so here's the point. Paul has his experience, right? And then he does something with it, and then even goes out of his way to expound very rich, complicated theological treatises to sort of summarize that experience.
Yeah.
I suppose my question to Matt would be, say if you had that experience, or say if I had that experience, or even Than, you had that experience, would we be a clone of Paul? Well, I don't think so, because Matt, you're in a different side of the world, I'm in a different side of the world, you're in a different side of the world, and if we all had that experience, it would just fall back down to what, say, Leibniz was saying all along, our so-called unique experiences in our own ways, spiritually and so on. And that's another thing, sometimes we just do it like subconsciously, we just do something with it, we produce stuff, some people make art, some people make music, some people do go out of their way to try and expound on it. The point is we then get to work and do our own thing, and Paul is just doing that, but that's all he's doing. Now, I suppose Matt could push back and say, well, notice that Paul has the privilege of having his writing and his experience now preserved in the Bible, so to speak. What about all the unknown voices that weren't preserved in the Bible? And I think my response back to that would be something like Hebrews 11, where it's interesting that the author of Hebrews, who I believe is a female, Priscilla.
You hold to, okay.
Yeah, I hold to Priscilla. Yeah, I've had a very careful, you have your uninformed type that will say Paul, right? No offense when I say uninformed to anyone who thought it was Paul, but if you thought it was Paul, it does come from an uninformed position. But I did look into Apollos, and I did look into, I kid you not, there there's a very unique opinion that it could have been Mary herself, which was just a little bit.
I've heard all of these. I just haven't looked into the arguments for all of these. So
yeah. But Priscilla, I think, is the one. And so in Hebrews 11 and 12, this cloud of witnesses language, which, guess what? Paul in Ephesians 1, also in Philippians 1, especially in Romans 8. Now think about this. Okay, Paul has the so-called privilege to be in the Bible. All right. But Paul, his entire focus is about, like Romans 9, for example. I am willing to be accursed for the sake of my brothers, the Jews, and so on, so that they can have this realization and the salvation that I realize to be now the truth, as he says in Galatians 1, when he actually goes 3 years away, comes back, then discusses with. He comes back for about 2 weeks, discusses with Peter. Hey, did you guys okay? Here are my notes, and we're going to share notes here. Am I correct about this? And yeah, they're shocked. It's like, this is the guy that was persecuting us, and now he's come back with exactly the same gospel message as we are proclaiming, with him not even here to begin with. So there's your so-called like 2-3 witnesses sort of argumentation. But Paul, when he goes out his way to discuss the gospel, he puts you and me and everyone else, all the saints for the last 2,000 years, as the ones. So in other words, even those unknown voices that we may not know about in church history, who have done their own thing in glory to God. Paul's mission is to bring that about. Or Paul's like his endeavor is exactly why he calls himself to be the least. He wants to put himself like at the back, because this experience is grand. The finish, like ultimately your focus should be on Jesus. So technically Jesus should be the focus, not Paul in the Bible or anyone else really. That's what he says in 1 Corinthians 1. So some of you go after this guy and this guy. No. Was Paul crucified, right? And ergo, when you see the list in Hebrews 11 where so and so did this and so did this, how interesting the list ends with, and there's many more to come. We can't go ad nauseum. Obviously, if it's a first century document, we can't presume what's going to happen in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th centuries. And but heck, we have the patristics, like the Apostolic Fathers, the Didache, the Apostolic Fathers, the ante-Nicene Fathers, then the post-Nicene Fathers. Now we then see the church play out this grand role, all due to one verse. Okay, so, and I'll conclude with this verse. If you go to Ephesians 3. Ephesians 3, the same chapter at the start, where he says that the secret of God's salvation has now been unveiled. If you go down to verse
Oof, that doesn't look.
What?
I'm just putting Ephesians 3 on the screen, but I put it on.
I can share my screen if you want.
Yeah, let's do that, because my Logos Bible software is also acting up for some reason.
Yeah, that's okay. Okay, so in fact, let's just read it properly, because it's specifically verse 10 and also 11. So, for this reason, I, Paul, and I'm presuming it's coming up.
There it is.
There we go. So for this reason, I, Paul, am the prisoner of Jesus. Very interesting language. Okay, prisoner of Jesus for the sake of you Gentiles. Surely you have heard about the responsibility of administering God's grace. Again, he understands it's a responsibility. Of administering God's grace that was given to me on your behalf. Not on Paul's behalf. On the behalf of literally everyone else that's not a Jew. and how the secret was made known to me through a revelation, just as I wrote about briefly in the past. The Damascus Road stuff. So by reading this, you'll be able to grasp my understanding of the secret about the Messiah. So Paul wants to be transparent. So by reading this, I'm no one special. I just want you guys, everyone reading this, to understand this so-called secret that I've discovered, which in previous generations was not made known to human beings, as it has now been revealed by the Spirit to, now is it just to Paul? No, to everyone. Yeah. This is that secret. The non-Jews, basically, are heirs in common, members in common of the body, and common participants in what was promised by the Messiah Jesus through the gospel. So I become a servant of this gospel according to the gift of God's grace that was given me by the working of his power. To me, the very least of all the saints. Now, just to clarify, the Greek hagioi, that's usually translated saints, in the Old Testament, it literally means, the Old Testament equivalent is literally the holy ones. Now think about this. In Ephesians, like if you go back to chapter 1, where he says that Jesus has not only been raised, right, and has been seated at the right hand, but he's far above every rule, authority, power, dominion that can be named, and God has put everything under his feet, but it's all ultimately for the good of the church, which is his body, right? And you and I are seated with Jesus in the heavenlies, in that sense, as hagioi, as holy ones. So, when he says over here, the very least of all the saints, he's saying he's the very least of all the holy ones, or in other words, you and I are the holy ones of the body of Christ. Yeah. Now notice, Matt, like imagine Matt having a dialogue with Paul. So Matt, I understand you see the Damascus Road as this grand thing. But according to Paul, it's not a grand thing.
Yeah.
His mission, he sees the salvation of people. He sees the people turning to faith in Christ. He sees that to be more important than his Damascus Road experience. You see, so Paul's pushback back to Matt would be that. Yeah. Now, what does he then say? He says, this grace was given so that I might proclaim to the Gentiles, now notice this, the immeasurable wealth of Jesus, and help everyone see how the secret that has been at work was hidden for ages by God who created all things. Now, when I spoke about the patristics and the church, right, that's verse 10. He did this so that now, through the church, the wisdom of God in all its variety. Now the Greek underlying all its variety here is literally like if you take an object and every time you turn it, there's something new to discover, and you turn it again, there's something new. In other words, there's no repetitiveness every time you turn this object. It's a very beautiful, interesting Greek word that he uses here. So that means the wisdom of God is always something brand new to learn, which communicates the omniscience in that sense. So the wisdom of God in all its variety might be made known to, now this peculiar phrase, the rulers and authorities in the heavenly realm. Oh yeah, that's Paul going in that divine council, like he's sort of like slipping into that mode a little bit, because just to summarize, in the grand narrative of the biblical story, it's not just God and humans and like human sin and God's angry with human sin, and that is a very unfortunate misunderstanding of the Bible text. When you then read the works of, say, Heiser, Walton, and so on, the cosmic story is such that you have God and the gods, with humans being caught in the crossfire. And so there's a bigger picture, a bigger cosmic narrative going on, that the gods that caused the chaos, the true God wants to communicate now. The church that now he's established through Jesus will replace them.
Yep.
And so this will be made known now to the archons and the aeons of the heavenly realm, in keeping with the eternal purpose that God carried out through Jesus our Lord, in whom we have boldness and confident access through his faithfulness. Now this is a very Jewish way of talking, specifically this verse 12. Boldness and confident access through his faithfulness. Now think about it. Now, Matt may say, "Oh, this is like a Jewish superstition about like entering the Holy of Holies, and you have to do all these rites." But think about it psychologically from a Jewish perspective. Say if that is true, that what you're standing on is holy ground, and there's issues with uncleanness and purity stuff, and okay. I would argue that that is indeed a superstition in the large ancient Near Eastern context, but at the same time is a truthfulness in regards to, because if he's a true God, yes, there's meant to be reverence here. It's like a weight off your shoulder. So notice the ramifications as a Jew, the boldness and confident access. Wait, I can go there to the throne of grace, like Hebrews 2, Hebrews 4, all the time, without any worry about having to do all these rituals. I have confident access, but it's confident access through whose faithfulness? Jesus. If he's ever so present, like, he was buried, so he died, buried, rose again, and literally in the Greek, the rose again part is, and he's still alive, like he's still interceding. Like if that's that's all spiritual theological realities, but if that's true, as Christians, when we go to church, especially the Orthodox type that have a very higher sort of reverential approach when they take communion, for example. Like this is what then Christians. This is why they find, say, high church to be this very like otherly this very other thing. Because of statements like this, and then so verse 13 says, "So then I ask you not to become discouraged because of my troubles on your behalf, which work toward your glory." So I think a lot of people would be selfish. Okay, I'm just throwing this out there. I think a lot of people would be selfish that, hey, do you really want Paul's Damascus Road experience? Because there's a lot of troubles that he had to face.
Yeah.
And a lot of people would be selfish in saying, no, thank you. Or thank you very much, Paul, for doing the hard work for us, sort of thing. But again, that first statement that was discussed and that Matt told you, just a simple reading of the scripture here is my pushback against Matt. But again, with all due respect. So
yeah. No, and I'll say this, Matt and I talked after the debate a little bit, and I talked to him about the divine council, about the chaos conf, and how it makes sense of that stuff, and all sorts of these things, and he just looked at me like a crazy person. So because he grew up like a Southern Baptist, like fundamentalist in his words, so like young earth Christianist, all these other things. And so
yeah
I think this was the first time when we had dinner after the debate, when I explained some of these things to him, he was just like, that sounds cool, but as a Southern Baptist, I think you're crazy. So I'm really curious to know, like, if he does watch this too, like what he would say to all this kind of stuff that we're covering, because you have very. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I made a chart actually in my Daniel commentary, just to summarize the big issue with when you're talking about divine council issues. So here it is. I'll share my screen with this. And Matt may reflexively say, you sound crazy. But it's not you making it up. It's actually the hard work of a lot of biblical scholars that have got that thanks to ancient Near Eastern scholarship and what's really going on in like Psalm 82 and so on. Now we can unravel the the weirder passages, I suppose, and what is God trying to do. So here is a summary. You have the creation context. Now, again, my frustration with internet atheists, YouTube atheists, there's sort of like a paradox where one side will mock, say, the creation account as being this. They presume young earth creationism is the true interpretation. So then they'll mock Genesis 1 and 2. Then when you have the more sophisticated not just scientists but also theologians saying, wait, no, that's just one crappy concordism that you have the right to refute, but you haven't refuted the passage. So then they introduced the much more beautiful sort of, here's the ANE context to show it's polemic. Then the more sophisticated internet atheists will then jump on that bandwagon and start, ridiculing it in that context. You see, so it's sort of like you damned if you do, if you damned if you don't, sort of.
Yeah.
But let's just put all that aside. Like, let's just see what the text as a story. Okay, think Lord of the Rings, right? When you read Tolkien and all the fantastical imagery, yeah, we know it's fiction. But there's a point that Tolkien's wanting to make with respect to that rich, very out there imagery. And don't forget, the irony here is that the Bible, starting with Genesis, this so-called out there imagery is not, it didn't originate with it. Because the same, so like, Derek and Myth Vision and so on, they'll all say something that is ironically true, and ironically it proves my point. This rich imagery is already there. Genesis is late in the game. And if it's late in the game, it's a response, and interestingly, kind of like an atheist response, if you read between the lines. So in other words, if you remove God from Genesis 1, the word God, all the superstitious terms like Tiamat and Marduk and Tehom is Tiamat, like all that, like the sun and the moon are not named, they're just called the great and lesser lights. And like it reads like a very like, hey guys, all what you consider to be deities, it's just natural objects in the night sky.
Yeah, my audience loves all of this stuff. I don't know if you've seen my series on the Chaos Conf and all that jazz, but I went. They love that.
Yeah.
Now you're getting everybody pumped up too.
Yeah. So and in fact, Tananin in verse 21, right, of Genesis 1, and God created the Tananin, the chaos, with King James says like the great whale or something. But David in Psalm 104, because he's polemically talking against the Egyptian art and creation hymn, uses Genesis 1 and just flat out says, and he created Leviathan. So the chaos creature is already there in Genesis 1. Now, was there indeed a seven-headed chaos creature? Seven-headed, by the way, comes from Psalm 74, which is also using Genesis 1. Yeah. No, this is the superstitions of the ancient Near East that's already there.
Yeah.
Which, after I show this chart, I want to show what the indigenous people of Australia, so the Aborigines, I want to show as a sort of like a litmus test what some of the Aborigines did with their very rich cultural memory, especially with what's called dream time in Aboriginal culture. What they did with Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd. Like that, trust me, you'll find that fascinating. But I'll just summarize this bit, then I'll get to that. So Genesis 1 and 2 is setting up the cosmic temple scene. It's setting up, hey, you guys have a procession of your deity in 7 days, that can't see or eat or speak or whatever. But our deity transcends everything. And not just that, the entire reality that you and I are able to breathe and swim and eat and walk and sleep and think Matrix or something like that. This reality that we're able to enjoy is because of this transcendent being that transcends all your gods. And therefore, it's not in 6 24-hour days that you do your procession with your local deities. It's literally like 6 epochs of unknown time that this God that we worship created everything. And so the sun is not some deity, the moon's not some deity, they're just lights. Then, if we take the reality of, what you call like the divine council and the God of gods, as sort of interacting between God and humans, that's the context of the passage. Again, in light of the passage is trying to give a anthropological engagement. So what we would do anthropologically with human evolution and the migration patterns of humans and so on, the passage is trying to do its own here's our version of human anthropology in light of the divine. So why do the nations exist? Why do they have other gods? Well, there was these 3 rebellions, specifically culminating in the third and final one, Tower of Babel. And then if you have a disinheritance, well, if we go along with a hypothetical 70 nations that we know of in the known world at the time, hence the epics of like El and his 70 sons. So see, the Jews are like, oh yeah, there was 70 sons that went into Egypt.
Yeah.
Or the 70 elders that go up to see Yahweh in Exodus 24, or even Jesus down the line in Luke 10, he sends 70 other disciples. Like, again, these are just all very carefully crafted terms and numbers that are deliberately there for a message. So the 70 nations are disinherited. That means that contrasts with the so-called 70 sons of El that you ancient Near Eastern folk believe in. But Yahweh, well, he's allotted to himself this particular nation group, starting with Abraham. And then the first engagement with the gods happens to be the Exodus. Notice that Yahweh doesn't engage the deities or the gods at any time until the Exodus. And then finally, then you have the conquest. And then finally you have the kingdom. Then you have the exile. Now, what's interesting about the exile is that, and this is something I was discovering when I was writing on Daniel. Well, in my Daniel commentary, so this is page 581. I'll just remember that. Way at the start, I talk about God's infiltration of Marduk's sacred space, just like, and I use the analogy of. Oh, by the way, I used Yoda's quote here, judge me by my size, do you? Because Israel was just this tiny, puny nobody, right? Anyway, so have you seen Age of Ultron?
Yeah.
Right. So these are all the deities that I go through with respect to the Babylonian context that Daniel has to engage with. There's Babylon, there's the blue top of the ziggurat, and remember, you know how lapis lazuli is the blue stone that they see on the top of the mountain, the feet, the sapphire color that's under the feet, and that's all the polemics. But when you come down to
thank you, Sus IP.
what did Sus say?
He sent a €2 just saying Than's silence is extremely attractive.
Oh wow, yeah, that's now Sus is a good contributor. I don't know who he is, but I do know he lives in the UK, and I know he loves trolling. So it's
so fun. Anytime I'm on IP's channel, you just see a bunch of those guys.
Right. So I use this as an example of it's important that the exile happened. Okay, in hindsight, when you think about it. So, in Daniel 1, the most pettiest clash, with respect to the exile, the most pettiest clash with the gods is to do with food, where Daniel decides not to eat the food of Babylon. What's interesting is that, and as I say over here, and as I'll quote some of the scholars, within a cognitive linguistic frame set, eating vegetables is a way for Daniel and his friends to set themselves apart as vessels through which God can act inside Marduk's sacred space. And again, think about it. Everyone in the ancient Near East had their sacred space analogies for their deities. Yahweh was not the only one. But which God came out true? Which God came out ultimately victorious? Because see, if this end goal is the cross, now, that is why it's so shocking. That's why we have a lot of hymns like slain in his victory. Think about that wording, slain in his victory.
Mm-hmm.
How can you have a conqueror who has died, but that makes him a conqueror? You see, that sort of paradoxical language is part of this this gospel narrative that Paul tried to communicate. So over here, a perfect analogy of this can be derived from Age of Ultron, where Jarvis can be, say, Yahweh, and Ultron is Marduk. Now, Tony Stark in the movie says, Ultron didn't go after Jarvis because he was angry. He attacked him because he was scared of what he can do. So Jarvis went underground. Okay, Scatter dumped his memory, but not his protocols. He didn't even know he was in there until I pieced him together. So the point here is that, so Bruce Banner, comes back and says, and you just assume that Jarvis's Operation Matrix can beat Ultron's, and then Tony Stark says, Jarvis has been beating him from inside without knowing it. So, by narrating the fact that Daniel and his friends prefer a different diet, Daniel establishes a base of operation for God within Marduk's sacred space. So, in the process of time, Yahweh is going to bring about his messianic plan, right? Jesus and so on, where the Jews will indeed survive the exile. So in Matthew's genealogy, where we see a particular name involved in his genealogy called Zerubbabel. Now Zerubbabel, and we all know who Zerubbabel is, but his name literally means seed out of Babel. So there's the exile happens. Oh no, Yahweh is indeed defeated. Oh no, just like Jarvis. Oh, we presumed Jarvis was defeated. Nope, he's still been there. bringing about the fact that Deuteronomy 32 had the disinheritance of the nations. So Israel is now this little puny little nation. How are we going to get back to nations? Well, we're going to get back to nations by going into exile. Why? Because the Babylonians distributed the Jews around the known world, when they then ruled everything. So then by the time you reach, then when the exile stops and finishes and you have the Jews coming out of the exile, some of them remain in their pocketed areas. So when Pentecost happens, the Jews of the surrounding known world, of the Table of Nations, thanks to the exile, they come back to worship, and now they hear the message. And then they send that message back to the known world, and then the gospel spreads like that. And then Paul's underlying mission then is Spain, because Spain is the farthest westernmost point, Tarshish, because Paul has in mind like Isaiah 66 and all that. And literally in Isaiah 66 it says, in fact, let's just go there. I'll just show it to you.
While you're pulling that up, Sentinel Apologetics. Are you flirting with Than? What the heck? I'll take all.
Yeah, he's done the. I was trolling him in return with.
You got the chin out.
Yeah. And he decided to make a whole channel with that.
I know. Photo. It seems like it's a rite of passage at this point.
Right. So in Isaiah 66, it says that the Lord will come with fire, his chariot will be like a whirlwind to pay back his anger. Like, again, okay, chariot, fire, but anger? This sounds a little bit like, wait, what's going on here? With fire, with the sword, the Lord will proceed to judgment on all humanity. And it's like, okay, what's going on here? Interestingly, when you look at the commentaries of those who's compared Acts chapter 2 and Isaiah 66, it's the same sort of language with, it's just a fancy word, it's called Merkaba mysticism, but it's, in Acts 2, when it starts with the tongues of fire, and they're having a sort of like a moment with Yahweh, like a storm, like as you see in the Old Testament, like storm clouds and a theophanic sort of experience. And that's, so in other words, Isaiah 66 is talking about some sort of judgment thing that God will do.
Yeah.
When we then see what happens, that's exactly what happened on the cross, culminating in Acts 2, where what you see here in verse 18. I know their actions, their thoughts. Come and gather all nations and languages, and they'll come and see my glory. I will put up signs among them, and from them I will send survivors to the nations. Whoa, survivors? Oh yeah, the 3,000 saved in Acts 2. And there's the list: to Tarshish, Libya, Lydia, and all it goes, right? But I love this bit. To the far off coastlands that have not heard of my fame or seen my glory. Whoa. Then they will proclaim my glory among the nations. So that's the point. Like, remember, we just read in Ephesians 3, this is the secret, that the Gentiles are now heirs in common.
Yeah.
So they have the privilege now. Well, what's first in the list? Tarshish. Oh, goodness. Yeah, Paul, get to work. You've been doing enough torture, like, locally. Go and be one for the Gentile. Like, go far away from this place. Spread this message, but to the farthest point imaginable. And sure enough, that's his mission. So when you go and see what he says about Spain, and this is in Romans 15, he says, this is in Romans 15, verse 24. Well, just to clarify, he does say, well, where is it? Yes. So he says, this is why I have so often been hindered from coming to you, the Roman church. But now, having no further opportunities in these regions, I want to come to you, as I've desired to do for many years. Interesting language. No further opportunities in these regions?
Yeah.
So now that I'm on my way to Spain, that's Tarshish, I hope to see you when I come your way, and after I have enjoyed your company for a while, to be sent on by you. Right now, however, I'm going to Jerusalem to minister to the saints, blah, 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 blah. Then he says they were eager to do this, and in fact, they were obligated to help them. Now notice this, if the Gentiles have shared in their spiritual blessings, they are obligated to be of service to them in material things. This is what he's doing here, is contrasting the Gentiles and the Jews in Jerusalem. And then when he completes his task, he repeats the Spain thing and speaks about his struggle, and on it goes. So now the final point I wanted to make was the emu with the Australian Aborigines. So check this out.
Thank you again, Sus IP. Sweet dreams, my little angel.
Think about again the anthropological context of like, again, Matt saying, why can't everyone have a Damascus Road experience? Well, this is beautiful. The Aborigines of Australia don't need a Damascus Road experience. What they've experienced already is sufficient for a gospel presentation in their own context. So this is in the book. By the way, this is a very, very recent publication. It's called Grounded in the Body, in Time and Place in Scripture, papers by Australian women scholars in the evangelical tradition. So it's a book dedicated to scholars who were women in Australia and the engagement with the land and so on.
Yeah, I'm really excited to hear about this.
Now, I'll just read this bit. So, the emu appears in many dreaming stories. This bird of the land tells us who the Creator is and about the Creator's protection and love. Science now suggests Aboriginal peoples are the first astronomers. In linking science and the dreaming, we look to the night sky. Now, just quickly, just show my screen. This book, The First Astronomers, I highly recommend. It was published just a few months ago, How Indigenous Elders Read the Stars. Why this is important is because Aborigines come to Australia 65,000 years ago. They are very, very, like, ancient and rich when it comes to Pleistocene period, like, hominid stuff, like psychology, the way they used to think. So it's very important in anthropological studies. Okay,
yeah, I just put on my list.
Right, and it's also done by an Australian astronomer who specializes in what's called archaeoastronomy.
Okay.
So now, by me, the creator spirit emu left the Earth after its creation to reside as a dark shape in the Milky Way. The emu is inextricably linked with the wide grasslands of Australia. the landscape managed by Aboriginals, the fate of the emu people and grain are locked in step because, for Aboriginal people, the economy and the spirit are inseparable. Europeans stare at the stars, but Aboriginal peoples also see the spaces in between where the spirit emu resides. Now, superstition. Obviously, it's important to see, it's interesting to see the way they used to think. So there's a type of animism at play. But what happens when they are introduced, just like Genesis 1 and 2 is a demythologizing of the other ancient Near Eastern myths in that polemical way, that ironically, if you remove the word God from it, people like Lawrence Krauss and even Matt himself would probably agree with the wording, because, you know, it's giving a very natural reaction of the known world. There were Aborigines that, when they came across Psalm 23, they couldn't help but go, oh my goodness, this has massive relevance to us in our religious context. But at the same time, it not just has relevance, it seems to upgrade it, and it seems to also modify it. It even seems to like clarify and correct, and it even gives some sort of clarity about this emu superstition that we had just because we're looking at the night sky. So, Aboriginal Christian leader Ron Williams rewrote Psalm 23 in an Aboriginal style, assisting in acknowledging the father emu's role in caring for its chicks, just as the father God loves and protects all people as his children. This is this is how Aborigines understand Psalm 23. My big fella boss up in the sky is like the father emu. He will always look after me and take me to green grass, and lead me to where the water holes are full and fresh all the time. He leads me away from the thick scrub and helps me keep safe from the hunters, dingoes, and eagles. At night time, when I am very lonely and sad, I will not be afraid, for my father covers me with his feathers like a father emu. His spear and shield will always protect me. My big fella boss always gives me a good feed in the middle of my enemies. In hot times, he makes me sit down in a cool shade and rest. He gives me plenty of love and care all of my life through. Then I will live with my big fella boss like a father emu. Notice that. Then I will live with my big fella boss like a father emu. Whoa! That's what Paul says. To be, not only are you the body of Christ, you're the Hagior, you're the Holy One. You will be seated in the heavenlies with him. That cares for his chicks in good country, full of peace and safety, forevermore and evermore. So the emu can therefore tell us that when we look to the stars and when we look at the bird emu, we see the creator and understand the interconnectedness of creation. So, okay, so I'll stop sharing there. So,
I'm seeing the connection. I clearly, I see it. Theology but maybe make it explicit for the audience here.
Go for it. Yeah.
Well, I was going to tell you to do it because right now people are probably like, "Who the heck is Father Emu?" Right? But to me, it just seems like this is the same story of the Israelites, and you just see it kind of reflected in other nations.
Yeah. So you have this big buildup, right? That Paul knows about. Acts 17, he quotes Deuteronomy 32. You know, you seem very religious, all these deities and so on. But there is an unknown God I want to talk to you about. He allotted the portions, he allotted the nations, and now at this very moment has now designated a man who died and now rose again, and judgment will happen. And that's why they're kind of like, what's this blabbermouth trying to say? Resurrection and God and the nations. But Plato, I could bring it up, but basically I'll just summarize it. Plato verbatim quotes Deuteronomy 32. Now, how the heck he knew about that? But he actually says, obviously in the context of Zeus, and that there are gods that govern other nations, but there's an ultimate being that wants to bring it all back, like a father emu in the Aboriginal sense. So think about it. A Semitic culture group, not just Paul, by the way, before Paul, at the Great Commission, Jesus telling his 11 at the time, go into all the world, Acts 1, which is also Matthew 28. Go into all the world, into even Samaria, to the ends of the earth, starting in Jerusalem, proclaiming the salvation. Now, if I was there, like Sus IP, just like Sus IP, I would troll Jesus. we are a Semitic group. Well, obviously Hellenized, so we're speaking Greek, but we know a little bit of Aramaic and Latin and Hebrew. But you're telling me that this very localized thing, where we specifically have something called the Court of the Gentiles, there's a reason why we have that, because we keep them away. You're telling me this somehow affects everyone now? And not just that, but okay, you've come back, so is this the time you'll restore the kingdom of Israel? See, they're still thinking materialistically, in a military sense, is what I meant, not materialist, but in a military sort of victory with Messiah as King Messiah. And Jesus is like, no. It's I've done it differently.
Way bigger than that.
Go into all the world, and this message will be applicable to all the other people groups. Especially Isaiah 66. To the far off coastlands that's not heard of my fame or seen my glory, which is the Aborigines. So somehow this message will still communicate. And that's Romans 10, by the way. In Romans 10, I'll conclude it with this, and then I'll get you to make your points. So I'll share my screen again. And by the way, this is Paul. So in Romans 10...
I don't have any points to make either right now. I'm just having a blast listening to you.
Okay. All right. Well, in Romans 10, it's all about evangelism. And notice that he says here, well, obviously verse 13, everyone who calls in the name of the Lord will be saved. Yep, okay, fine, whatever. But how then can people call on someone they have not believed? How can they believe in someone they have not heard about? How can they hear without someone preaching? And how can people preach unless they're sent?
Yep.
Again, subtle implications with Paul's situation. Like, in other words, Matt, would you be willing to do that? And then he says, as it is written, how beautiful are those who bring the good news. But, not, okay, so all well and good so far. Now, verse 16, 17, and 18 is interesting. So he builds up the logical deduction context that, yeah, if they're going to make this faith declaration in verse 13, well, people have to be sent out, the Great Commission and so on, and then they make the choice to make that declaration. Then 16 says, but not everyone has obeyed the gospel, right? Lord, who has believed our message. Consequently, faith results from listening, and listening results through the word of the Messiah. Now, verse 18 is one of those weird, as usual, Paul going into his... like as if he's made up this beautiful argument, and then suddenly he just goes on some weird tangent. But I ask, did they not hear? So didn't they hear? So in other words, you have to send people for them to hear the message, and then they have a decision to accept it or not. Okay, but what about the context of those where they've never had the privilege of anyone being sent to them? So the question is, did they hear? What about those people that genuinely did not see Yahweh's fame and glory? And Paul answers this rhetorical question by saying, certainly they did. In other words, there are people that have also heard the gospel message in some way, somehow, without people being sent to them. What's his defense of that? Well, this is his defense. He says, in fact, their voice has gone out into the whole world, and their words to the ends of the earth. Now, what's he quoting? He's quoting from Psalm 19.
Mm-hmm.
The heavens are declaring the glory of God. You know, day after day they pour forth speech. There is no speech, no other words. Their voice is not heard, right? Yet their message goes out into all the world. Now, what's interesting about the word message here is that the Masoretic text has, so the Dead Sea Scrolls as well, and even the Syriac has their line. I don't know if you see the footnote that I brought up here, but...
no, it's not popping up.
Okay, so the footnote has either sound, message, or, that's the Septuagint, or the Masoretic text literally is the line. Now, what the line means there is, and this goes back to ancient astronomy, the ecliptic. In other words, think astrology, but not in the superstitious sense.
Not the woo-woo way.
Yeah, think, again, but I'm not even, at the same time, I'm not even going down the Gospels written in the Zodiac. I'm not even going there. The point is, think like the Magi as an example here, as a litmus test. The Magi don't, they never encountered Yahweh or some angel spoke to them. They just pop like ex nihilo, bang, they're there. By the way, scholarship has tried to showcase that the Herodians and the Herodian dynasty and the Magi had some sort of political connection before the gospel, before the birth of Jesus. But the Magi just bang, they come and they're like, hey, we have this conception of a king of Judea, and we've seen his star. And there is scholarship that's got into the Babylon almanacs and looking at the religious theological sort of conjectural conclusions they're making of some sort of like new world order that'll come about in the West. And I believe the star is Jupiter, so it does a few occultations and so on.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
And so that, notice, just like Father Emu, so the Magi are doing their thing, and we're expecting something here. Have you figured out anything peculiar going on? So Herod's freaking out. He's like, okay, well, let's get the Jewish scribes, and so then they aren't, because they're the specialists in that. The Magi don't have the Bible. Yeah, we are expecting the Messiah to be in Bethlehem. And then notice how all of this sort of teases out and plays together. So Matt, would you want to be one of the Magi? Like, okay, Paul had his Damascus Road experience, but what about the Magi getting it correct when it comes to the Messiah who's to be born? Or what about the Father Emu stuff? Wouldn't you want to be an Aborigine back 65,000 years, and then that tradition will then, in the process of time, be utilized by his later generations? In other words, that Aborigine 65,000 years ago, one of his kids is now going to be a Christ follower, marrying Father Emu theology with Jesus. Like,
that's really cool.
The message is a lot bigger than just this. Oh no, Paul had this Damascus Road experience, and I'm selfish of that. Like, Paul says that's nothing. Like, that was meant for me and me only, to bring about this message to have a larger ramification. And
and I love that, and I really, man, if there's so much you can dig into with just that one question that Matt asked, and we just spent.
That's why I liked it. That's why I liked it.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and like, if I'm just going to summarize succinctly everything you just said together into like a few words, right? It's like, maybe you don't get a Damascus Road experience, but you get a uniquely you experience that's part of this grand cosmic narrative that God's putting together, right? And you have this specific goal or placement in this grand story of redemption that God wants you to play. You get the privilege.
Your discussion with Matt is no worse or better than my apology, or whatever I do in my life, or whatever anyone else does, because Paul also brings it up with later in Corinthians, he brings it up with the different functions of the body.
Yeah.
Okay, the eye is above the foot, but if it wasn't for the foot, so the foot is equally responsive and equally important as the eye that's up here. It's just that whatever complaints the foot may have, the foot doesn't understand that there can be certain complaints that the eye has, and vice. Everyone is unique. Everyone has a role. Is the point?
Yes.
In an equal way. There's complete egalitarianism here. There's no the eye is better than the foot or something.
I had this conversation with one of Exploring Reality's like financial supporters the other day. We were talking on the phone, and I don't know if you know the backstory for me or anything, but like, I gave up a 6-figure salary to start doing what I'm doing. I tried to do both at the same time and failed miserably. And the long story short is this guy that's a financial backer for Exploring Reality was just like, man, you do so much for like the kingdom, and you put everything on the line. And I kind of stopped him right there. I was like, hold on. This would not even be possible without people like you. Like, And in just hypothetical scenario, we're on the new Earth, and we get to see all the work that's been done through exploring reality. But I'm not going to be the only one sitting there looking at all the stuff that Jesus has accomplished through exploring reality.
Yeah.
You and everybody else will be there at the same time. And like, I also believe like the things that you uniquely bring to this, like to the table, and like you kind of get the point. Like it's this interwoven web of just everybody's in the right place.
And even Matt's contribution is important.
Exactly.
Because again, I'm not saying that Matt, that you and Babylon are equivalent, but when I brought up the Babylon example of Babylon played a key role, or the Exile played a key role, because God wants Babylon back. That's the point. It's not that he wants to destroy and he wants everyone back in the known world back. How do I get it from the grasp of the genuine evil one? So ironically enough, Matt's, or any atheist engagement really, like take your worst atheist, like your mesotheist, like your God hating whatever, they're still an imago Dei. They're still in the image of God. They still have the right to come and have a taste and see that the Lord is good. You know, that sort of. Now, when you spoke about richness, I want to quickly share this. This is something
please.
I've just written in my Daniel commentary, because I've been doing a lot of Muslim engagements lately, and I discovered something in the Quran that really just made me go, wow, if ever there was a missed opportunity for Muslims. So here it is. It's connected to what you're talking about with respect to money. So, I'm sharing my screen again.
Yep,
and it's in the context of Daniel 9, and this is all brand new, freshly edited, because I'm revising my Daniel commentary lately, which, if anyone's interested, you can get if you access my Google Drive. So in Daniel 9, it speaks about the anointed one that is cut down, and we know that to be the violent death. It also says that it was not for himself. In other words, his death paid for the kingdom, and for his, there you go, there's the word again, the holy ones, the saints. Now, look at 2 Corinthians 8:9. Although he was rich, he being Jesus was rich, for your sakes he became poor, so that you, through his poverty, might become rich. Wait, but we know... Hang on, Jesus, carpenter? Wait, he's not rich? And so allow me to read, like, I'll read it, I'll keep reading, and I'll read some of the patristics and a scholar as well. So every other deity fails in comparison. For example, in Islam, Allah is not only depicted as sovereign, but is curiously called the wealthy one. Whenever the wealthy one appears, there's always this polemical pushback against Christians, like, see, he's the wealthy one. He doesn't have a son. You know, that's the sort of pushback.
Yeah.
In other words, for Muslims, Allah is self-sufficient, has no need of anything. However, for Christians, irrespective of the degree of poverty which Jesus may have experienced, and this can be exaggerated, it was not economic poverty about which Paul means here. Instead, he had in mind Jesus' whole incarnate life. Now, when I say second power and first power, again, this is a little bit of a heads up to Matt, who may be listening. When you introduced Matt to divine council stuff, added to that scholarly discussion is this thing called the two powers in heaven, which
we talked about it.
Right, the prototype to Trinity, and so I'm glad he's at least aware. So so in other words, this is, if anyone is sort of aware of that, this is like a no-brainer stuff. Like, I'm not just writing this just to be like a wow factor, like, hey, what the heck's the second power? This is just common language now in the scholarly discussion. So the second power, or the second person of the Trinity, to become poor means setting aside his pre-existent glory in the presence of the first power, and that's exactly John's gospel. Although all of the Word was already there in the beginning, was with God face to face, ontologically is God, he became flesh, he lived among us. And so therefore, now Matt says, and all atheists argue, that no one has ever seen God. That's exactly right. So what about all the times where people have experienced, like in the Old Testament especially, some sort of
like a theophany.
Theophanic, right. Or you know, like what about a real fleshy, tangible? I could actually, you know,
The
nail
angel
you
of
to a
Yahweh.
cross. Well, not just that, but I can actually nail you to a cross, sort of.
Oh, okay.
Like God, let's see if I can nail you to the cross. Like, notice I'm saying that deliberately as it's verging on blasphemy, but that's exactly the attitude of some people in the first century. And sure enough, that's exactly right. This uniquely existing God, who's close to the Father's side, has revealed the true God by becoming flesh. In other words, Morpheus entering the Matrix. Neo can now punch Morpheus if he needed to. So we must never forget that it was only through his poverty, which is his incarnation. So poverty, so in other words, from that high elevated godlike position, which is his richness, there's a poverty that he wants to engage in so that we become rich, which implies what? Well, in the early church, they called it theosis, glorification. Yep. So there was a price to be paid for the blessings we enjoy in Jesus. Included in the price was the cost of the incarnation of his pre-existent into a fallen world, but great though that was, it was just the beginning. There was also the cost of rejection, ridicule, persecution, betrayal, suffering, all culminating in the agony of Gethsemane on the cross. These things together made up the full price of our salvation. And a beautiful verse. So 2 Corinthians 8 verse 9 says that. But if you go at the end of the next chapter, 2 Corinthians 9, if you go to verse 15, and I'm not sharing it here, I'm just going to read it out. It says, Thanks be to God for his indescribable gift. Wow, what beautiful language. Thanks be to God for his indescribable gift. So, how did early Christians reflect on this? This is pretty lengthy. For the sake of time, I won't read all of it. I'll just read the highlighted portions. So, this is the chief point, as Basil says, for example. It is the first step toward the likeness to Christ, who, being rich, became poor for our sake. Remember your nature, that you came into the world naked, and naked will you leave it again. But the argument here is, so from dust you were made, to dust you return. The gospel message is that need not be the case now in light of the resurrection. Ambrosiaster says, he was made man in order to take humanity right into the Godhead. Augustine's wonderful sometimes when he's really cool. So I'll read this bit over here where he says, to make us worthy of this perfect gift, he, equal to the Father in the form of God, became like to us in the form of a servant and refashions us into the likeness of God. I can go on and on with this language. And Ralph Martin is the modern day scholar, where he goes into, from the scholarly point of view, debunking the, some may have the argument that, no, this is talking about economic riches. No. This is a critical scholarly commentary where he says, nope, the language that Paul's utilizing here is basically equivalent to the Johannine prologue. So it's talking about Paul wants to drive home the single point that the Lord of glory took the form of a human being for your sake, and that's basically the point. So so if Jesus, again, this text then inspires someone like you, ourselves, especially Paul and all these guys, about now our position in light of the grand picture. Life, so to quote Ben-Hur, the movie, the classic Charlton Heston Ben-Hur, where Ben-Hur, out of that rage and anger against his friend, who he presumes that his mother and his sister has died. But one of the Magi, that's one of the key characters in the movie, is there with Ben-Hur, and he says, but all of life is a miracle. It's just that one small, very simple line that's just so beautiful, and how he sort of, again, in that classic 1950s style of filmmaking, they tune in the music, and he goes into this like self-reflective philosophical notions of, that the God who's now become man has now seen the sun rise today. Like, it's so beautiful, that language. Like, think about it. The God of this whole universe, this petty stardust we call planet Earth, is not petty, because God chose to come to this speck, this, what Carl Sagan calls, this pale blue dot.
Yeah.
In the voidness of space, right? So, yeah, like that. That's, as a Christian, that's how reflectively, with the privilege I have of everything we're able to enjoy with technology, movies, books, the Carl Sagan type thinking. I then look to the gospel, and I again, John 3:16, for God to love the cosmos, the world. Why is this message? Why is this message problematic? I consider it to be the grand love story of all love stories, in my opinion.
Yeah. No,
I suppose it comes down to whether. So I suppose Matt would be like, well, that the way you put it, Rob. Like, I'm sort of presuming Matt will say it's beautiful, but in that sort of like that biased way, but I suppose his pushback would be, but still you have to prove it. You see, it's always that, where's the line in the sand? Now you have to prove to me that the resurrection actually happened, that, the crucifixion and resurrection, but there's good evidences for that is what is the next answer. So
yeah, and here's the thing. I think the beauty of this narrative is actually evidence that it's true as well. Like, now this goes into like a really like,
and that's coming back to your original point.
Right.
Why is it beautiful? I mean, imagine the resurrection didn't happen. So these people are wonderful writers. Like, my goodness, the way they could just
the meta narrative is still beautiful, even if it didn't happen.
To keep consistent, and then Paul going, they're gonna love this one. Like, he's self-thinking this, but it's like the whole message is one big conspiracy. Like, they concocted the story just because they wanted to show off their, like I don't know, like, how else would you describe it? Like some weird, they had nothing better to do, but they just made up this grand meta narrative.
I know,
this will be a miracle in itself, sort of thing. Like, I don't know.
No, I mean, like,
yeah.
I there's a few different ways to look at it. Like, for me, when I'm assessing a lot of these different things, like, one of the things that I think you can reason to, like, independent of scripture, is that, like, if God exists, he would do some of these things that you like. And I kind of do this in my opening statement, like pointing out the types of things that God would do, in things like taking on flesh and walking in solidarity with us, and like getting us to participate with him in like some grand redemptive story. Like, those are all beautiful things, and it's like the beauty of the connectedness of scripture and the beauty of the story itself. Like, if anything, go ahead.
Just quickly emphasize on the flesh bit, because if Matt were discussing with Muslims, I kid you not, in Islam they have theology like Allah doesn't exist in the toilet. I'm going deliberately graphic here, because they'll say Allah doesn't exist in the toilet because it's profane, because it's dirty, it's unclean. It's in fact, it's like as if they have,
it's not befitting of his majesties.
Or they have this disgust response to what they consider to be nastiness of life, which in a philosophical sense you and I would call chaos kampf.
Yeah.
But God, like, again, the parable, healthy people don't need a physician, but sick people do. Now, what Jesus is saying there is, he's not mocking, or he's not judging or ridiculing sick people. So this is why the Gnostics got it wrong, by the way. They understood very well that how could a divine being be fleshy and so on? Because, see, we consider the flesh to be this very finite, like porous thing.
Yeah, especially if you're like a Neoplatonic type person. Right. You think the material world's evil.
But God is not, in the keyword here, intimidated by it. Yes, it's chaos kampf, Romans 8, corrupting bondage. But I'm going to join myself to it.
Yeah.
I'm going to make my tent. That is my tent, John 1:14. Oh, so that glorification of exactly that happens. Wow. So I can be just who I am, like the stardust form, this who I am. You still see me special in your eyes? Yes. That's the point.
Yeah.
And so therefore the toilet, yes, the creator God went to the bathroom.
You can
May
say
have
whatever you
even
want on my stream, by the way.
yeah, he may have vomited as a baby. That's a completely human element that
Yeah.
he went through. And so when you see apocryphal stories of Jesus speaking from the crib, and which ironically enough the Quran still continues that nonsense, it's these people still, they're still having this, like, maybe he's like an ubermensch baby that can't the S word and P and
Yeah.
no, the point. This is why, again, what I just read from 2 Corinthians 8, he from his richness he became poor, and then he because he has enough wealth to transfer that poverty up to being rich at his level. Why? Because he loves those in that poverty state. So I genuinely want to hear Matt's response to that. Like, if that is true, is that an evil message? I don't think so. Like, that's not.
Yeah, I mean, I would anticipate his response to something like that would be like, well, look, if I was God, I would have just set up a world without any pain and suffering, without a need for an incarnation and atonement and all this other stuff. And then he'd kind of go into all that stuff, right? So what would you, like, I have a response that I would give back to that, I guess, but like, what would you say?
Yeah, my response is Leibniz. But again, Leibniz in light of the bigger story. So Genesis 1 starts with chaos already inbuilt in the system. Now Revelation 21 starts with, I saw a new heaven, new earth, and there's no more sea.
Yep.
Oh, whoa. I'm tracking with what you're saying, John. In light of the incarnation and the resurrection, this theosis, there's no more chaos. The chaosness of the sea, which is in Genesis 1. Leibniz's point is this. So that's the theological engagement. Leibniz's point is, if you have an omni-being creating, if this omni-being tried to create what Matt would desire, there's a problem philosophically. How can you create? So if Yahweh created something that's like Yahweh, notice the oxymoronic notion of that phrase. Yahweh creates Yahweh. Well, we know as a presupposition, Yahweh is omni, all-powerful, all-knowing, eternal. The very fact that you have the word create there puts him into this other Yahweh thing is in the category of createdness, which implies finiteness and so on. How can you create ex nihilo an omni-being? You can't. Now here's Leibniz's very interesting, powerful point. Ergo, whatever the created thing that Yahweh chose, hence the best of all possible worlds, he chose this world to be the best of all possible worlds to bring about this incarnation, right? So in other words, it's fine-tuned so that sufficiently the hypostatic union can happen, which is a grand, like, if you think about the way Leibniz was thinking about that, that's he definitely had a lot of brains to have that sort of like flashbulb moment, right? And so he creates this best of all possible worlds. Now Matt's pushback against the chaosness of this world is a little bit ironic, because Leibniz says what is natural to the created thing is unnatural to the creator, and what is natural to the creator is unnatural to the created thing. In other words, createdness by default automatically introduces things like finiteness, Cartesian space and time.
You're poking at something that I've been putting together for a while now.
Right, because Leibniz, I'm dealing with, my field is in mathematics, so that's why I'm using Cartesian language. And so Cartesian space and time, finiteness, entropy, decay, what we call chaos, blah blah blah. But guess what? It's actually natural to it. It is meant to be as part of it intrinsically. Its ontology. Ergo, whatever God is, which is not that is not natural. Now, okay. So fast. If I took Leibniz into a DeLorean, threw him back into, say, the time of, say, Moses, and Leibniz were to able to communicate to Moses Cartesian language in Paleo-Hebrew or something, Moses would be like, yeah, that's called sacred space. There's your... Even back then, they understood the differentiation between something that is other and us. So then the next question is, ironically, and admittedly, it is a roundabout way to getting to that point. But this is again coming back to Matt's, responding back to Matt. What Matt wants will happen. This other wants to bring this created thing that is not natural to the other to be natural with it. So now you have a blend. So Revelation 21 says, I saw a new heaven, new earth, there's no more sea. And then John says something interesting. And the tent of God is now among humans. And he's made his home. And now he, this notion of the tears and the pain and this, all that's been wiped. I create all things new. Interesting. So that means Jesus is the bridge to bring about what was always meant to be a two creation model, not a one creation model. So the Bible, right from the start, always has a two creation model in mind. And I'm not the only one making this up. Like, there's been careful thinkers that have used that designation, two creation model. Let me just show it to you here. Okay, so this, I'll just share my screen again.
You're good.
A good friend of mine, John, let me just go to the title of the book. It's called The Generations, keyword. Notice he's pluralized, the generations of heaven and earth, Adam, the ancient world, biblical theology. So John Garvey is good friends with Joshua Swamidass.
Okay.
And so this book was inspired by Swamidass's. I mean, you can see here in the preface, his name is mentioned there. But notice he says over here, as a throwaway line, he's like, it is as if there are actually two distinct, though partially overlapping patterns of sacred space in Genesis. I suggest that distinguishing these two patterns is crucial to understanding the two creation model I've been following in this book. Hugh Ross of Reasons to Believe, for example, in his book on Job, Christianity's two creation model provides the appropriate context for answering these questions of purpose. According to the biblical model, the current creation exists for more reasons than merely to provide humans with a beautiful, comfortable, well-stocked home. It cannot and will not ever fully contain God, whose stated goal is to live with us and to be our God. That's the Revelation 21 I've been reading. It cannot and will not last forever. While it does allow humans to engage in complex, fulfilling relationships and to discern the existence and divine nature of the Creator, it fulfills other greater purposes too. The universe serves as a theater in which God exposes the sin problem, preserves free choice, and brings about an end to sin and sin's effects, evil, suffering, pain, and death. What's more, it establishes conditions whereby God can guarantee permanent freedom from sin and ultimately unshackle human free will from the restraints imposed by the cosmic space-time dimensions and physical laws. So, yeah, and that's why we're leading into the second creation context. So that I'm just giving these very brief, although I could go into detail. But that is the answer back to Matt. Like think about it, Matt. Imagine if God starts off with a one creation model and it's perfect right from the start. Then it's just him and it's just the Blessed Trinity. But if it's the way it's already happened, we can actually track on a lot of things that's already transpired. Now notice, over 13.8 billion years for, say, the universe, then 4.5 billion years for the Earth, then about 4 billion years of evolution. There's a lot that's gone on in this so-called first creation.
Yep.
Now, I have here the Chronicles of Narnia. Do you know how C.S. Lewis ends it?
I haven't read it. No.
Well, he says that basically at the end, let's see here. He talks about the cover page. Okay, here we go. This is the last paragraph of Narnia. So C.S. Lewis says, "And as he spoke, he no longer looked to them like a lion, but the things that began to happen after that were so great and beautiful that I cannot write them. And for us, this is the end of all the stories, and we can most truly say that they all lived happily ever after." Now here's the point, because usually that's a cliche thing, and they lived happily ever after, right? But C.S. Lewis, being a Christian, says, but for them, it was only the beginning of the real story.
Mm-hmm.
All their life in this world and all their adventures in Narnia had only been the cover and the title page. So this 13.8 billion years that we've experienced is the title and cover page of Revelation 21.
Yep.
And then he says, now at last they were beginning chapter 1 of the great story which no one on earth has read, which goes on forever, in which every chapter is better than the one before. So that's a very romanticized version of Revelation 21, and kind of like 1 Corinthians 2. No eyes seen, no ears heard the things that are prepared. John 14, I go, be at ease. I go away to prepare a place for you. You know, if that's true, then the chaosness of this reality, which again, I'm not nullifying the horrors of it, because the fact that I'm agreeing or calling it chaos we are all in it together. And God then goes, I'm not keeping you alone in that. I'm coming to enjoy. I'm using enjoy there carefully. I'm coming to participate in that chaos comfness with you and defeat it, which is 1 Corinthians 15. Death is swallowed up in life. Everyone's seen Thanos being wiped away with Tony Stark's snapping of the finger. Did you know the Greek word for death is Thanos?
Yeah.
So it's like, when I saw that, I'm just like, yes! This is such a good gospel opportunity for all the kids here in the cinema. Thanos, the way he just wipes away, and in that sacrifice Tony Stark makes, notice, painful sacrifice. Painful for him, but obviously painful for all his loved ones.
Yeah.
What more God, who is your creator, going through that motion, but at the same time showing a sense of victory, which in the context of the Tony Stark story, Tony indeed was he was indeed victorious.
Mm-hmm.
So
no, I love that. I'm now you're just making me more excited for my last mark in the chaos conf stuff too.
Right,
because
right.
My last episode in the series is going to be Jesus being enthroned on the cross and conquering death. And so just like in that Thanos story, the very tool that Thanos is using to kill off everything, Tony Stark is using as a reversal
to defeat death. Death is put into death. The whole Hades, the second death, that's the humor of the text.
Yep.
Notice, Paul in 1 Corinthians 1 says, God chose what is insignificant in this, what is nothing, to defeat what is something. The something here is death. What is nothing is the wooden stake.
Yeah.
The wooden tree. So, if you are impaled on the tree, you will go into the something we call death. Death is defeated by nothing. That's how much God mocked death, or the whole notion and reality of the grave and death, that he used what is nothing to defeat what is something, and thereby demonstrating his omnipotence, his all-powerful sovereignty. So yeah, no, good connection with that.
Yeah, no, I love all that, and your answers are really similar to mine. In a philosophical sense, you might just ask the question, like, can God create a perfect being? Well, you're pretty much just asking, can God create another one of himself? And I would say that's logically impossible. So then you're gonna have finite beings, and then from there, if you have finite beings, that lends to obviously finitude. Finitude lends to different weaknesses, and that includes weaknesses of the will. So you're going to necessarily have some sort of wrongdoing and brokenness. And so, of course, God's going to create a world like this. And then from there, it's like, but that's not the end of the story, right?
I suppose my question to Matt would be, when you and I enjoy movies like Matrix and Endgame, Avengers Endgame, and I'm pretty sure Matt would as well. And I'm pretty sure if we asked Matt, hey, did you like that ending with Tony Stark, and really cool ending, and I'm pretty sure he'd say, like, yeah, it's commendable, blah, blah. And, why is that considered awesome and like $2 billion in the box office? And when you have exactly that, like, these stories or these tropes are coming from the ultimate one, the grand story, which is one who was indeed slain in his victory. But because it's exactly the same. So
yeah,
that would be one of my questions again as well.
Yeah. This is why I wish, man, this is like when we were having the cross exam and discussion area, there are so many times where I was just like, man, I wish we had more than 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So we're almost at 2 hours, and I really appreciate your time, Rob. You cool taking some questions?
I don't mind. If there's anything else in that cross exam that you want to go through, if there's any
No, I think I think that was the main thing you wanted to cover. Like,
that ultimately, I just wanted to just get that off my chest. So if Matt sees this, and if it's short enough for him to, in his own time, watch it.
Yeah.
As Christians, this is how we don't. Okay, and so I'll just repeat it again. We don't care about the whole, I was able to thrash and defeat and debunk.
Oh yeah, no, of course. There's like I could have look. My rebuttal was trash. You watched the debate. My rebuttal was like not rhetorically loaded. I could have gone up there and been done the whole William Lane. My opponent said this, and this, and my argument, blah 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 blah. Matt didn't address this. I could have done all of that stuff, right? But it's just like
yeah. I just want to communicate to Matt that as Christians, and Than, you're like a breath of fresh air in this, but me, in my own personal life, outside the YouTube stuff, and especially when I do my own devotions, like say writing the commentaries, I do it as it's like a labor of love so that others can benefit from it. But in my worship, right, this is what's flowing in my mind, and I'm not a slave to it, or I'm not like I've closed my mind off. Guess what? It's enlarged the mainstream scientific discourse more. For example, Matt may be shocked to hear that I'm a massive endorsement of, say, evolution and so on. Yeah. But Than and I are both are. And so when we do our Christian worship, it's in hindsight of this narrative that we're reading, and then the self-reflection that we have with it, and the whole like as if it's like a UFC wrestling match or something, or some sort of like as if there's like a fight and we have to fight to defend this story.
Yeah.
I don't have time for that. I'm more okay, this is gonna sound interesting. I genuinely am very selfish of my time in my worship and my reverence and the betterment of who I am. And like, yes, I'm a failure, but every time I go back to the text, there's again further improvement, further self-reflection. It's like a way of life. I mean, that's what it was called. Are you part of the way? Before they were called Christians. So coming from that point of view, so there's an enthusiasm, and there's a joy to share this message. Like, hey, come and taste and see that the Lord is good. Now, I understand Matt's story is such that he's been there, done that, all that. And I'm not discounting that, by the way.
Yeah.
Either. I'm just saying, despite the criticisms you've raised, which I ironically agree with, you know, I also refute the young earth creationists and so on. But that has not pushed me away from Christianity. In fact, all the more, there may have been certain statements you've made that I may have been unawares about, that when I go and do the correct thing, and that is engage the scholarship, not some sensationalist material, I then realize, oh my goodness, this, you know, like, in other words, thank you for your service, Matt, in helping me discover certain other truths that I may not have come across, you know. So
no, I love that, and I love what you're saying there too, because my, like, exploring reality isn't meant to be out there and like get argumentative with atheists or any of any of that, right? The mission with exploring reality is share the research that I do with other Christians so they can positively affect the culture. But what I do is just really just a form of worship that I have. Like, like, so I love all of that. And Matt and I talked, like I said, we talked about all of this kind of stuff. And
because that's where mateship happens, because when you're seeing each other as living, breathing, carbon-based life forms that are like, you can have a beer and a discussion over it. Like,
yeah, I just
that,
like,
to me, it goes far beyond just mere, you're just a face on a computer screen and I need to defeat this individual. Like,
yeah, exactly. We had a fun conversation after dinner, and I remember even him talking about like, oh, well, bringing up all like the typical like atheist stuff about the theology of the atonement and all these other issues, and I was just like, Matt, what if I told you I agree with everything you're saying? He was just like, well, I think you're crazy then.
Yeah.
So, well, let's dig into some questions. I gotta wake up a little early tomorrow because we're leaving for out of state for just a tiny little
and prayers and safety for your, and enjoy that your trip. So
yeah, okay. So I didn't get to this, but understanding Christianity. Thank you for the super chat. The story of redemption in the Bible is truly beautiful. Praise the Most High. Amen, man. Okay, this might be a bit off topic, but I remember Rob in Q&A 58 talked about a census in 3-2 BC. However, I couldn't find any reference. Is it just a church father, and does it work with Quirinius being governor of Syria?
Yeah. So I've been doing a little bit more digging on that. Let me bring up. In fact, I just released this on my Discord. Let's open the browser and this particular photo. Let's see here. I'm going to share my screen. I'll answer it first with this, and then I'll get to the specific point about the census. All right, you see this?
Yep.
Okay, let me zoom out. So this is a book published in Brill. It's a 2012 publication by Not Haft, and it's titled Dating the Passion, the Life of Jesus, and the Emergence of Scientific Chronology from the 200s to the 1600s. In the conclusion of his book, so prominent attempts to date Christ's birth and death, I was intrigued by why the 25th of December was a thing, really. Like, why, you know? So he goes, this whole book was basically summarizing every author that you're seeing listed here. That book finalizes through all of this. Notice majority are December, but notice you have, interestingly, except for this one in 4 BC, you have 2 BC, 1 BC. Ignore the 21 and 22 and 33 BC stuff here. That's just totally way off. But the point is, you have 1 in the 9 and 8 AD section, 180 section, and again goes back to 1 BC, 1 BC, 2 BC. Now, curiously, on the right side, so that's the birth. On the right side, you have the Passion. So you have mostly in March, but then you have a correction with respect to April 33 AD, 3rd of April. And then it shifts into that direction. What's interesting is that Scaliger initially thought it was 23rd April 34 for his death and 25th December 2 BC for his birth. but then he actually corrected it, and he went for a September/October 3 BC and a death date of 3rd of April 33 AD, which is, by the way, the consensus death date. Usually there's a debate between 30 AD and 33 AD. 33 AD is now the consensus. Now, I found this very fascinating that he would go down the September/October 3 BC route, because that aligns with other chronological features, which now I'll discuss. So, the whole census thing is an issue with the death date of Herod. Now, John Rhodes wrote a paper for Jets in 2011 that Josephus actually got a few things wrong, not Luke, with respect to the census.
Mm-hmm.
So that's point number one. Because you get the Quirinius stuff through Josephus. So therefore, if Herod dies in 1 BC, which Andrew Steinman and Roger Young have gone at pains to elaborate the very crucial 1 BC death date of Herod, Quirinius then fits very nicely in a 3/2 BC schema, and again later in the 680s area, which means if Jesus is born in September 3 BC, that makes complete sense for the registry to happen just after he's been the temple where he's gone, he's circumcised as a Jew, and he's registered in the temple, and then you have that particular registration on the Quirinius. So Luke then gets it right if Josephus is wrong. If Josephus is correct, though, and if the 4 BC death date of Herod is correct, then we have a genuine error. So it's literally one of the two.
Mm-hmm.
If Josephus is wrong, and if the Herod death date is pushed to 1 BC, you have room for Quirinius to be in the 3/2 BC area, because Jesus was also born in basically 3 BC. And so therefore, 3rd of April 33 AD, for his death date, would make, interestingly, Luke 3, where it says he was about 30 years old. Well, Jesus would be 30/31 years old when Luke says that, if he's born September 3 BC and dies 3rd April 33 AD. So that also fits that age schema as well in Luke 3.
Awesome.
That should suffice. But go to Steinman, Roger Young, and John Rhodes in regards to the Josephus getting the census dating wrong in the Jets paper.
Nice. No, that'll be interesting, because I was going to look into that too. So
Yep.
I just haven't come to a conclusion on all that yet. Next question is, well, maybe you don't want to answer this, but do you think Matt's fundamentalist background has turned him off to God? I don't have access to Matt's direct experiences or anything like that. I don't have access to that, so I don't want to psychologize him. I can say from my experience, because I didn't grow up a Christian. I was an atheist most of my life, like you guys know, and a lot of my aversion to Christianity was from my few experiences I've had with other fundamentalists when I was in high school, for instance. So I can't imagine what it'd be like growing up in a fundamentalist background. So, like I said, I don't want to speak on Matt's behalf. I don't want to make any presumptions there. But if I put myself in those shoes, I can see that having an effect, because it did, without the fact that I grew up in that background. Did you have anything to say on that, Rob?
Yeah, I only know Matt through the fact that he's a famous contributor to that atheist podcast show, and he still engages online, and his rhetoric is indeed commendable in the sense that he's a veteran in the game, so to speak. He cuts straight to the chase, sort of thing. There's a certain intimidation that people have about him, but at the end of the day, he's just a man just like you and I,
hmm
and if we shouldn't see him as this, Satan or enemy or something. No, he's a living,
He's a
breathing
human.
human being that also deserves equally the grace and love of Christ. Like, and so why should we feel intimidated? Just everyone has a story. Matt clearly has a story. I don't know the happenings in Matt's life today. There's always that, like, if you want to be friends and to build bridges, that's where you start to walk. You walk in that other person's shoes, so to speak, and that's something that you need to invest in if you truly care about that person. And the same applies back to Matt, by the way. So Matt would also have to do the same with Yuthan. Like, in other words, if I'm going to be friends with Yuthan, I am interested to see why you are, believe, and why you do this and do that. It goes two ways.
Yeah, and I'll say this, like, Matt and I have kept talking since the debate, like, and he's pointing out how frustrated he is with some of the comments about, like, some atheists are making towards me. Like, if you haven't noticed, I have, like, little body twitches here and there, and that's just because I have some medical conditions that cause a lot of pain. And, like, he's pissed off about the people making fun of me from his side, and like, we're having some good conversations. So yeah. All right, Piano Matt, question for Sam. I'm assuming he is asking me, Than, instead, but can you explain what faith is and how it impacts your belief system? I have a video on this because most people like to point to Hebrews 11 for, like, the definition of faith. So if you want to see what I take faith to be in a more exegetical way, you can check out that video. But I would say faith, as I view it biblically, is like a fealty. Like, if you think back to, like, medieval times when, the queen says, "Pledge your fealty to me." This sort of, like, undying servitude, and undying devotion to somebody. Like, that's what I would see faith as, this undying trust and servitude and faith and, like, faithfulness to someone. How it impacts my belief system, I don't really know that it does, because it's not like an epistemic tool, right? Anybody, I don't know, Rob, do you have anything to say at that?
Yeah.
And disagree with me if you disagree.
No. So that's fine. I was about to say something like what IP did with Aaron Ra. Pistis being also something that is reasonable, rational. Like, it's sort of like you can take the word faith and apply it in a epistemological setting, which did upset a few atheists. Like, how, and especially those in the scholarly sort of arena, say Derek of Mythvision, trying to say, no, faith, at the end of the day, pistis just means like a blind faith or something like that.
Yeah.
But I think that's still uncharitable, because when you do a word study on pistis, so for example, the analogy that was made by one of the atheist Bible scholars on Derek's channel, which I agree with, is where he said, in Indiana Jones, The Last Crusade, so there's that invisible bridge, that final bridge to get to the cup. And the instruction is just take a leap. So there's this hesitancy, and I don't see a bridge, but apparently, according to this diagram, there's, like, as if you'll be floating on thin air, right? So he still takes the leap, and then his foot lands on an actual bridge there that's camouflaged. So there's that tension. So in Hebrews, when it says faith is the substance of things not seen, okay? The very next word after pistis is the word substance. So what's the word for substance? Hypostasis.
Yeah.
Faith is the hypostasis? What? Because the same hypostasis word in Hebrews is used back in Hebrews chapter 1, where it says that Jesus is not only the apogasma, he is the hypostasis of this universe. literally the very substance of his being, like that he upholds his universe with the power of his word. So hang on, hypostasis is to do with like what is tangible and reality, and what is like actually there. So that's the tension. It's like I have faith, say that I'm sitting on this chair, and I mean with a certain knowledge of nuclear theory, the decaying process of this chair is obviously in operation right now. It's the wear and tear mechanically is happening, plus the atomic structures will break down, but it'll take a few trillion years for the atoms of this to become a non-chair. But the point is, for now, in other words, I have a epistemological understanding of this chair, but I don't have to I don't have to always have that. I can have a sort of like a simple faith that this chair, with a reasonable certainty, will survive today, under my weight. Same thing with the Indiana Jones. It's like, through all those trials and tests leading up to the cut, initially it was hard, and initially it was a little bit spooky and weird, but he kept succeeding, and now this was the ultimate test. And he still succeeded by, I'm going to have a sense of like faith, but the substance, the reality was also there to confirm that faith.
Yeah.
So, is there a God? Did the crucifixion actually happen? Did the resurrection actually happen? I have a faith in that, but he is faithful, and that is, if that's true, then everything works out. So, yeah.
Awesome. All right. Very off topic, but you mentioned the divine council. I've always been confused about what it is. So what is it? Rob, you probably have a bunch of videos on this. I was just going to share while you're talking. I'm
Go to my archive channel is my first recommendation. Sentinel Apologetics archive. I have, Unseen Realm is the go-to.
Buy this book if you want to know about it.
Yep. I have it on the bookshelf here.
Or if you want like a pop level version, Supernatural is pretty good too.
If you want my very like watered down, sort of like my own personal testimony mashed up with divine council stuff, there's a playlist I made on my Sentinel Apologetics channel called What Does God Want? Which, by the way, Than, since Matt may see me interacting with you about your debate with him, maybe you can direct that playlist to him and just be like, here's Rob's testimony or something.
Send me the link and I'll put it in the description.
Yeah. But divine counsel is, in a nutshell, God wasn't alone when he created human beings and so on. The whole point is that God has a family, a divine family, and that's one of the debates. Did this family pre-exist the universe? Like, did it pre-exist Genesis 1:1? Or was it simultaneous with the creation process? Now, I'm on the fence with that. Why they hold to the simultaneous argument is because Genesis 2 verse 1 says that once God finished with man and so on and he rested, then Genesis 2 verse 1 says, and now all the host of heaven were completed. So all the council members they came to fruition and so on. But anyway, the point is, the let us make man in our image language is to do with God and his divine council members. What you would call angels, basically a big family of divine beings. Now, the gospel, the context and surprise of the gospel is that divine council fell, became corrupted. Not all. This is why you have the 1/3 language in Revelation 12. Why did they fall? Because many times in the Old Testament they're described as corruptible. Because guess what? Just like what you were getting at with a created thing is prone to corruption. So notice, if the universe by default is prone to corruption, even spiritual beings that are created are prone to corruption. So Job 15 and elsewhere speaks about how God doesn't trust even the holy ones. But there's one member in the council that he does trust. That's his son. Now, Now notice the high Christological implications of this, because Jesus says this in Matthew 11. All things have been entrusted to me. Why? Because if Jesus was a created being, like what the Jehovah's Witnesses believe, why would Yahweh trust Jesus if he doesn't say trust even the good angels like Michael and Gabriel and so on? No, he trusts Jesus because they are in that hypostatic union. They are the two powers. So, the plan of salvation is the second power, Jesus, condescends himself to the lowest form to then bridge the two worlds and then have you and I, which is kind of shocking, by the way, to the council members. So like the elders in Revelation 4 and 5, if you go specifically to Revelation 5 verse 9, one of the elders in a shocking statement is like, by the way, you went and bought this other group of people and now we are replaced. So like the holy ones now, the saints in Christ, now become the reconstituted council with Christ. And so Hebrews 2 says this, by the way, where Jesus quotes from Psalm 22 again. So he quotes Psalm 22 from the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me?
Mm-hmm.
And he quotes verse 22 again in Hebrews 2, where it says, here you are with all the children. I'll praise your name in the congregation, and here you are with all the children of God you've given me. And Zephaniah 3, by the way, verse 8, I think it is, says that Yahweh himself takes the initiative to sing on behalf of this new council now. So Yahweh sings on behalf of this new council. Just like in Lord of the Rings with Aragorn. So remember that famous ending in Peter Jackson's version. This day does not belong to one man only, but to all. Let us all rebuild this world in the days of peace. And then he sings. Imagine that, the king singing on behalf of his people. So, I was going to say one more thing, but I think that should do. But that's basically it. So, yeah.
Cool. All right. And Odessa Than, while your appeals to Bayes' theorem and probabilities in general may be valid, do you think that in a debate setting you lose quite a bit of people by using such symbolism with some who may not be familiar with such? Yeah, that's my worry. I'm still trying to refine the way I popularize this. And I'm still learning how to do that. So I know I probably lost a lot of people. I know I did, because I got a lot of comments of people not really understanding the moves I was making. And so, like, I take full responsibility for that. And that's just on me to learn how to do that kind of stuff better. But I think like when it comes to a lot of these debates too, it's almost inevitable that it's going to come down to this kind of stuff. Because if you're talking about the resurrection of Jesus, somebody just might say like, hey, you have all this evidence that's very expected on the condition Jesus rose from the dead, and not very expected on the condition somebody, like, all these people hallucinated or they lied. But at the end of the day, just dead men stay dead. And so now you're talking about prior probabilities, and people intuitively are going to like think in a Bayesian way, and it's going to happen. And I'm trying to find the best. I don't know what the best way is to formalize things and popularize things while hitting on all the things that we need to hit on. And so I'm still learning how to do that. And I don't have all the answers right now, unfortunately. That's just kind of me laying my cards out on the table.
Bayes' theorem came from a Christian scholar, don't forget. And Swinburne's approach on Bayes' theorem is, I think, the best engagement with the how to calculate the probability of the resurrection and so on.
Yeah. So. All right. Where was I? Here we go. Do you believe that we can gather evidence while using all things in philosophy, history, theology, and science, or do only certain ones make the cut? I think everything is going to be collectively like evidence. that we're going to use to assess things, right? Like philosophical considerations, like you're saying, historical considerations, theological considerations, and science. They're all going to come together, and they're going to shape what we think about our theories and what we think about our worldview. And like even like we said today, like beauty, I think, is a type of evidence. So yeah, I think all these things work together. It's just a matter of like your heuristics, I guess, of how you fit all the data together. That's a bird's eye view of all this. Since it was a yes or no question, Rob, anything?
Yeah, that's basically it. Do you believe that we can gather evidence while using all things? I mean, but that is gathering evidence. We're gathering evidence from all these disciplines. And so far from what I've seen with respect to the gamut of Old Testament history and New Testament stuff, I see no issues really. And I'm going down the real like full-blown evolution, human evolution, just the granular stuff. I suppose when it comes down to the nitty-gritty stuff, like, you know, the 5,000, feeding the 5,000, and water to wine, and obviously the resurrection itself, discussions, more sophisticated discussions at that level then goes into what's called hypernaturalism, not supernaturalism. So maybe this is something, if Matt listens this far in, there is now a shift in relabeling some of the stuff as hypernaturalism, and in what sense? Well, it's interesting that the polemics in the Bible also engage supernaturalism of the other cultures, in that, just like I'll use the Gnostics as an example. Just as the Gnostics conceive of this reality as evil and subordinate and needs to be just done away with, and whereas the Christian message is no, God's gonna, it's, you know, this is creation part 1, and then creation part 2 is basically part 1 revamped. In the other superstitions, the gods had to supernaturally oppose the natural laws of this reality. Keyword, oppose it. Thereby demonstrating that they are indeed the gods. Can there be a God that doesn't need to do that? Can there be a God that doesn't work supernaturally, but naturally? If you want to say hypernaturally, okay, but it's still within the confines of the natural laws of this system. Can there be an omni-God who can do that? Because, see, think about it. Why would an omni-God be intimidated by the laws of nature? Therefore, he has to oppose the laws of nature to get his results. Right? And on top of that, you have it in the text itself, Jeremiah 31 and also 33, where God says, look to the laws of nature. If they break down, then my covenant with Israel breaks down. I kid you not. And then 33 he says, I've made a covenant with the fixed laws of nature. Oh boy. So the very covenants he's made with respect to the upcoming new covenant in Jesus, he's like, look at the immutability of the laws of nature. Just as the laws of nature are consistent and not arbitrary, my covenant will be consistent. So there's a parallelism taking place. Therefore, if God does anything what we consider to be breaking the laws of nature, I would then say, keep in mind these other texts that also have God clarifying and saying, well, I can't break the laws of nature because I've made this statement. So whatever you conceive to be now in that supernatural bracket, or breaking the laws bracket, well, that's the superstition of the other religious beliefs, but that's not me. And that maybe that could be something that you, being unawares of, because I'm that much greater, I'm able to utilize the laws of nature in a special way.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
All right. Just a few more left. Andy Gunwald, what parts did you think Matt was right in the debate, and what parts did you think he was wrong? This is going to be a very simple answer, but I try to, whenever I'm talking with people I disagree with, I tried really hard to point out the places that we agree and be really explicit there. So the times in our conversation where I told Matt, oh, okay, we're on the same page there, cool, or something like that, I agree with him. The parts that I contested explicitly, obviously I disagree with them. And there's a lot of stuff that was said in Matt's rebuttal and opening statements that I disagreed with, but I just didn't really get a chance to hit on because of time and the format of the debate and everything like that. So, yeah, I'll just kind of keep it at that.
Yep.
Will you be doing any more debates? Your debate with Matt went really well, so you should probably do more. Ugh. I'm gonna be honest with you. I don't really like debates. Like I'd rather just have a fun conversation with some people, and all that stuff. I get, like, how do I put this? Like, I feel like debates are almost like a necessary evil for the type of work that I'm trying to do. But I really don't like them. I at the end of the day, I think the only reason I'm like happy about my debate with Matt Dillahunty is because I don't think anybody really changed their minds from that debate or will change their minds. But I think people changed their minds about one thing, which is that Christians and atheists can get along and love each other without screaming at each other's faces. And they can have like a reasonable, loving discussion. So, like, will I have more debates? Probably. But I'm also not a good debater, as you could tell by our debate. I just had no rhetoric. Like, so who knows? We'll see what happens in the future. How would you guys respond to God making Lucifer and the Elohim that would become gods that the other nations would rebel? So I'm assuming this is just like the question, like, why would God create Satan and...
Or in hindsight, that the Satan figure would become the Satan figure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How would you respond, Rob?
Well, look at the models of... Like, I take into serious consideration all the religious models, and then I compare it with the Christian model. So, in Islam, the angels are depicted deliberately as having no free will. Ergo, they perfectly worship Allah, because they're not corrupt. Because, see, they understand the implications of free will leads to they will rebel. So therefore, they call Iblis, so what the Satan figure, they call Iblis the one that is corruptible. Because, see, we can't get around that. That has to be part of the story, right? He has to be corruptible. So that is nonsense, obviously. That's Islam coming centuries later, trying to work with what's already there with the Bible and so on. The curious thing about the divine being, though, Satan in the garden, is that he's not evil in the garden. There is no evil ontology. What's curious, though, is that man already has a propensity of evil before Genesis 3. And that's in rabbinic discourse. I mean, I'm going into the weeds here, but that's in rabbinic discourse with respect to the word yatsar, the verb yatsar, formed, when Yahweh forms the man from the dust of the ground. You have the Jews going into wild lexical connections with, see, the tree of knowledge is already there, and the tree of life is already there, and so this entity, this being, so it's what, okay, in Jewish discourse, it's what's called the Yetzer Hara, so the evil inclination. Genesis 6:5 brings this about, that man's thoughts was evil continuously. That's the Yetzer Hara part. Why? Because, again, created objects, created beings, evil in what sense? Evil in the sense that it's God's story looking down. So with respect to God and what he is, that's why it's evil. It's what is natural to the system is unnatural to God. So it's very natural for the discussion to be, hey, you can be like Elohim. You can either pluralize it, gods or God. And hence, if you have this, you can sort of have your own theosis. Now, Paul picks up on that in Romans 1. Romans 1 is Paul's summarization of Adam and Eve's story. Although claiming to be wise, they were fools. Their their thoughts were turned to like dark, worthless things, and their worship from the one true God turned to like four-footed animals. In other words, Paul is as a Second Temple Jew, he is summarizing the tree of knowledge there to be idolatry, a form of they committed idolatry, basically. The being then, so Satan, it picks you see glimpses of this in Isaiah 14, Ezekiel 28, where there's this notion of where God says, "You were this anointed cherub." In fact, there are some scholars that argue linguistically that that term there can mean "you, O serpent of perfection." Oops, there we go. Immediate connection to Genesis 3 serpent. This is Ezekiel 28, by the way. You serpent of perfection. Notice that language, perfection. So there is this implication that God didn't create these beings evil. But the language of the text then goes into, despite that category of pride and this sort of like inclination to, like a narcissism sort of to creep in, started to come in. And then the whole thing just unravels itself and explodes from there on. Like kind of like a cancer that then immediately emerges and boom, then the whole thing is affected, right? So so therefore it's the question, so then the final point here is we shouldn't really worry or care or even ask the question, why did God like see the question again,
why did God create Lucifer and other
that would become gods and so on? I'm not, the funny thing is I'm not interested in that. I'm actually interested in what God does with this thing now that's gone amok. Yeah. What does he do? And so therefore that's the gospel story. So
yeah, to me it just kind of boils down to the same old problem of evil at the end of the day, right? It's like what you're asking about Lucifer and the rebelling Elohim, like you're still asking that question about rebelling humans in the first place. And whatever theological story you give there, you add in the defeat condition and the fact that the gospel story harmonizes really well with that theological story, and you kind of get the same answer. So
yeah.
All right, last question: can you recommend any material on base theorem? Probably help a lot of people. Yeah. So I guess spoiler alert: I have. I don't know what I'm going to call it yet, but I have a series that I'll be putting out. I don't know if it's going to be titled like "How to Be Based" or something like that. But basically, it's just going to be like a walkthrough tutorial on like Bayesian epistemology and how to reason about these things. And hopefully people will get a better understanding and grasp on how to do this kind of stuff. So that'll be a really good resource.
My recommendation is, I don't know if you've come across this book. It is a little bit of a, not many people know about it. It is a slightly dense read. But it's called, and I'm sharing my screen so that people can get it. But I recommend this book, Jesus, Resurrection and Apparitions: A Bayesian Analysis by Jake H. O'Connell. It's a relatively recent 2016 work. Here's the table of contents. He explains what it is, and he goes straight into the reliability aspects of specifically 1 Corinthians 15 and all that. But so I recommend that, and I also recommend a good friend of mine who's actually in my own town. His name is David Gregg. He's just completed a work with memory theory. He didn't engage with Bayes in that dissertation, ironically enough, but the memory work can map onto Bayesian analysis. So
yeah. I interviewed David. He helped me with my debate prep actually a little bit too. And
okay.
Yeah, he's a good friend of mine.
Yeah. Okay. I didn't know that. That's cool.
Yeah. Small world.
Yeah. Wow.
And I didn't know that he lived close to you. That's really cool.
Yeah. No. So he used to run the Reasonable Faith, the Reasonable Faith event stuff every month or so in honor of William Craig. And I gave a few talks at his events, like in the local city area. So
Oh, nice.
yeah,
That's cool. Just a really quick. Here's like one of the first books I ever read on Bayesian epistemology was this one. There's stuff I agree with it in it, and there's stuff I disagree, obviously. But it's like that's going to be every book you ever read on these types of things. If anybody wants like a list of books, just email me and I'll send you a list of books to check out too. Like I'm happy to do that. What else was I gonna say? I lost my train of thought. That's okay though. But yeah, I'll have a resource on you for you guys. Oh, the other thing I wanted to say is you brought up his memory theory and stuff like that. I referenced a paper in my debate too about how our brains are kind of like pre-wired to think and reason in Bayesian terms too.
Yes, I remember that. Yes, yeah.
And so I can share that paper with you guys too. It's really cool. Because again, like this isn't just some made up thing that we're using to try to prove something that we wish was true or something like that. Like this is just the way people reason in general, and then all it is just a logical formulation or mathematical construction of how we do it. And it's just a formalization of how we do it.
I'm thankful that I'm taking the time to do this Quran studies on my channel, because I've been there, done that with the, when talking with Muslims, the go-to Quranic verses. And this time, to have a clear conscience, I wanted to go verse by verse, even reading the tafsirs and all that stuff. I've come across stuff I didn't even imagine would be in the Quran. And I've never even seen in any debates with Muslims where the Quran itself, because don't forget, in Muslim, I'm doing this deliberately as a comparison.
Yeah.
The Quran itself, don't forget, for the Muslim, is not only a little bit of a snippet of this big heavenly tablet of Allah that's specially given to Muhammad. And so Muhammad is like whatever he says is apparently from this heavenly tablet. Okay, so that's point number one. Point number two, when the Quran then gets compiled, we're reading what is actually the thoughts of Muhammad, but apparently is ultimately from Allah. And then the hadith are like the sayings of Muhammad, sort of just generally as the prophet. The Quran sometimes, it's sort of like schizophrenic. The Quran sometimes has to, like, there, Muhammad, yes, I know they call you, like, these are tales of the ancients, but don't worry, you're just meant to be a warner. They just disbelieve. And then, I kid you not, the Quran sometimes goes into these attempts to try and regurgitate older stories, like say Noah's flood, but just butchers it. So, for example, Noah's wife dies in the flood. One of Noah's sons gets perished. He tries to climb a mountain and dies in the flood. But all in the midst of Muhammad saying, how I know these stories is because they're downloaded into my head. I didn't know about this before. So now, this is proof that I'm a prophet. Am I saying the story correctly? Because I was never educated in it, but somehow I'm receiving this information, like Neo in the Matrix, like downloaded information. And the irony is the Quran then says, this is in Surah 11 that I've just finished, where the people are like, you do realize that the only people who actually believe your message are the ones that actually don't have an education. They've never learned. They're just like the common man. So the Quran is a good litmus test here, because now compare that with, say, Luke's introduction. Luke goes out of his way to say, I've actually tried to do my homework here to compile all that's necessary to build this first volume called Luke, which will then go into like the second volume to, Theophilus, that particular person he's writing to. Or the way Paul will go, of utmost importance, the creed and the implications of that. Go search the scriptures, the actual quotations of the scriptures. Like, it's night and day between a text like the Quran that is just jumbled up, it has no real chronological sequence, and then the Bible. So, yeah.
Yeah. All right. That's all the questions for the night. Rob, I really appreciate you coming on. Shoot me the playlist to the link for the playlist you mentioned.
I'll do it right now in the
and then I'll also I'll also put up the link if you want to send it to me for your commentary for people to check that out too.
Sweet, sweet.
And yeah, thanks for coming on.
Yeah.
Thank you everybody for listening. And we didn't really cover too much of the debate, but like I like we covered this one specific question that I think was really important. And it seems like, and hopefully Matt watches this and kind of just at least can put himself in our shoes to like kind of like think about it from the grand meta narrative approach.
Yep.
So thank you everybody for watching. If you're not subscribed to Rob, please go do that. And just remember too that we are still trying to raise some Patreon supporters for Exploring Reality. Slowly but surely trying to get rid of all the extra work in the background to kind of feed a family and everything at the same time. So please consider becoming a Patreon supporter. Rob, do you have a Patreon?
I do, and yes, money's tight, but again, only if you can be generous in that, it'll go a long way. That's all I can say. Yeah.
Yep. Amen, man. Cool. Well, thank you everybody again. Until next time, God bless.
God bless.